Tonight, breaking news. Police say a man wanted over the deaths of 3 people in Hertfordshire has been found. In the last hour, police have said that Carl Clifford has been found in North London and the 26-year-old has been taken to hospital. Earlier, people living near a cemetery told Sky News they saw armed police sweeping the area. It's after Carol Hunt, who was 61 and the wife of Sky and BBC racing commentator John Hunt, died alongside 2 of their daughters, Louise, 25, and Hannah, 28. The Home Secretary has described the attack as truly shocking. Also tonight, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer meets world leaders at his first international summit at NATO in Washington. Among them, President Biden, who's facing fresh calls tonight to pull out of the US presidential race. Keir Starmer faces pressure, though, on when the UK will up its defence spending. I'll be joined live by the former Conservative Defence Minister, James Heatley. Plus, Rishi Sunak meets the Conservative 1922 committee as 2 of the potential candidates to replace him clash online. We'll take you through the runners and riders. And as Keir Starmer arrives on the world stage, we'll look back at the times that occasions when a picture was worth a million words of geopolitical analysis. All that and more with Ben Bradshaw and Baroness Kate F, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. You join us this evening as a manhunt lasting most of the day has come to an end. 26-year-old Carl Clifford was being hunted by police in Bushey, Hertfordshire and in North London after 3 women were killed. Well, in the last hour, police have said that he has been located. Now, it's a fast-moving story. There is a lot that we don't know. We'll get the latest from on the ground in a moment as well. There's a lot that we don't know, but there is one thing that we do know, and it is depressingly, devastatingly familiar. 3 women are dead. They were killed in their home. A mum, she was 61, and her 2 girls, 25 and 28, both in their 20s, you know, that decade when you're working out who you want to be, where you want to go with your life, because for them, that's now over. A woman is killed by a man every 3 days in the United Kingdom. That number's actually been remarkably consistent for the last 20 years. Women are also much more likely to be killed by someone they know. 2/3 of them are killed by a current or a former partner. Domestic, that word that somehow doesn't feel adequate because terror can also happen in the home. The 3 women killed at home in Bushey, they were still alive when the emergency services got there. Well, yeah, Yvette Cooper, the new Home Secretary, has said the killings are truly shocking and she's been kept fully updated on the case. During the recent election campaign, she said that violence against women and girls will be treated as a national emergency under Labour. Less than a week into the job, 3 women killed at home. It certainly feels like an emergency tonight. We'll, of course, get the very latest from the scene in a moment, but first, just to bring you up to date with what we do know about this tragic case. Throughout the day, Hertfordshire police were urgently looking for 26-year-old Carl Clifford, who they believe may have been armed with a crossbow and other weapons. They warned the public not to approach him. The 3 women who were killed were later identified as 61-year-old Carol Hunt, the wife of Sky Sports racing presenter and BBC commentator John Hunt, and the couple's 2 daughters, 28-year-old Hannah and 25-year-old Louise. Police and paramedics tried to save the women who were found just after 7 last night, but they were pronounced dead at the scene. Well, in a statement released in the last hour, the police said following an extensive search, Carl Clifford, aged 26, was found in the Enfield area by officers this afternoon. He's receiving medical treatment, having been found with injuries. No shots were fired by police. At this stage, we believe the suspect was known to the victims. Detective Inspector Justine Jenkins from the Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire Major Crime Unit said, "This continues to be an incredibly difficult time for the victims' family and we would ask that their privacy is respected as they come to terms with what has happened." Following extensive inquiries, the suspect has been located and nobody else is being sought in connection with the investigation at this time. Well, my colleague Matt Barbette joins us now from Bushy, where he will also be presenting the UK Tonight later as well. Matt, what can you tell us?
Well, Sophie, it's a devastating story. As you rightly pointed out there, 3 women have lost their lives. It all happened almost exactly 24 hours ago, actually, where the 3 of them, mother and 2 daughters that you described there, were found at home just around the corner from where I'm stood here in Bushy in Hertfordshire. It's just a normal place. There's no other way to describe it. It's a normal cul-de-sac, and it will be so similar to many people looking at a place like this up and down the country. It's quiet, it's leafy. A lot of people will live here commuting into London, still within the M25, even though it's inside Hertfordshire. But round the corner, just a scene of utter devastation. 3 lives taken and many more destroyed as a result. Then early this morning, around about 8:30, the police took the unusual step of releasing a picture of 26-year-old Carl Clifford and sharing his name, because they really needed to speak to him in relation to what happened here last night. It's an unusual step, but it did suggest that they knew who they were looking for in this case. The manhunt went throughout the day. Big police operation, in fact a multi-agency operation, culminated in them all arriving in Enfield, some 18 miles away from where I'm stood. It'd be about a 40-minute drive this time of day, and everything centred on a cemetery in Enfield. Now, it's thought that Carl Clifford originally came from Enfield, so perhaps somewhere he knew, and ultimately he was apprehended there. He was injured, not by the police. They say that they fired no shots. They're armed officers who are on the scene, but he was somehow injured and is currently being attended to at the Royal London Hospital for those injuries. But in the wake of what happened here last night, a lot of lives devastated, and a lot of people here turning up in tears, dropping off flowers, just disbelieving at such a terrible tragedy happening here.
Incredible, isn't it? Absolutely unbelievable. Thank you so much, Matt Barbette there, who will, of course, be reporting more from the scene for the UK Tonight. Well, let's go now to our correspondent Rachel Venables, who is in North London, where Carl Clifford was found. Rachel, what's been happening where you are?
Well, there's been a huge operation here, not just by police, not just by Hertfordshire or the Met or even armed officers, but they were joined throughout the afternoon by their colleagues across the emergency services, from the London Air Ambulance, who we understand landed in the field nearby a few hours ago, also to firefighters. We saw the London Fire Brigade putting up drones as the Metropolitan Police and Hertfordshire Police with their armed officers scoured through the fields behind me, hilly fields, this huge open park, as they searched and hunted for Kyle Clifford in the hours after they told the public that he may be carrying a crossbow. We also saw paramedics rushing in to the Lavender Hill Cemetery, which is just behind me. It's down, accessible past Cook's Hole Road, which is the road that you can see behind me, blocked off by police now as part of their active investigation. Paramedics earlier racing in, and soon afterwards we had that alert from the police saying that Carl Clifford had been located in Enfield. This part of North London is where he's from. This is where they were searching for him. They searched an address as well this morning. We were told he is receiving medical treatment, having received injuries, and they said that he was found with those injuries. The police also stressing that no shots were fired, despite, of course, the huge number of armed officers that we have seen throughout this area. We've also seen footage, Sky News has had footage, pictures of him being stretchered out off the Lavender Hill Cemetery in Enfield. He can be seen receiving medical treatment, and we presume he has then been taken on to hospital to receive further treatment. But that was the end of this manhunt, which lasted little less than 24 hours, as now the police continue the next phase of their investigation, which is trying to piece together the evidence as they build a case, as they try to work out what happened in that home in Bushy last night, which led to the deaths of 3 women, Carol, 61 years old, and her 2 daughters, Hannah and Louise, who were women in their late 20s, mid to late 20s. An absolute devastating blow for the family, something that is truly unimaginable, but also something which will have left the community reeling. And the community here in Enfield, similarly tonight, struggling to come to terms with their connection in this awful tale. A real sense of fear, I think, earlier, and concern with those alerts from the police talking about their suspect, Carl Clifford, being a wanted man, the 26-year-old, possibly in possession of a crossbow. And certainly local schools, in fact, some primary schools, telling parents to pick their children up, to come inside and walk them home, rather than letting them go home as they might normally do on their own or catching the bus, perhaps. That was the level of fear here. So there'll be a reassurance. It certainly feels as though people have stopped to take a breath, and the emergency services largely have cleared out, but we have still seen a huge forensic team in place here. As I mentioned earlier, they've gone from the process of searching for their suspect to now trying to search for and gather that all-important evidence.
Thank you very much indeed. Rachel Venables there on that absolutely heartbreaking story there. We'll tune into the UK tonight at 8 p.m. because Matt Barbette will have a special programme from the scene in Hertfordshire as, of course, we give you the very latest on the crime that was committed there. Well, on to our other main story tonight. We will, of course, return if there's any updates on the story about that attack in Bushey. But a week ago, Keir Starmer was in the final throes of a general election campaign. Today, he was in Washington as Prime Minister, meeting fellow global leaders, including the US President at the NATO summit. It was his first taste of the world stage, but also his first taste of the pressures of office, with repeated questions about his new government's commitment on defence spending. Well, joining us now is the former Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey. Good to have you on the programme tonight. Keir Starmer at the NATO summit, what are your reflections? There's been a lot of focus on whether or not Labour are committing enough on defence.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, it's great to see our Prime Minister being so well met by world leaders. It's a kind of reminder that party politics is a rather temporary thing, and the UK is an important player in global defence and security, and I'm very proud to see that he's as welcome and fits in as well as a Conservative Prime Minister would have done. I am, however, disappointed that the announcement for 2.5% of GDP on defence hasn't been made here. I kind of thought it might be. There's no duplicity. In fairness to Labour, ever since we made the announcement back in March, they've stuck with what was the original Conservative position of when fiscal conditions allow. But I thought there was an opportunity to really kind of stamp the UK mark on the summit, send a message to allies, to Ukraine, and actually to Donald Trump and the Republicans who meet for their convention next week, that European defence spending was going to rise and the UK was going to lead on it.
How important is that to, I guess, kind of Donald Trump-proof NATO? Because, you know, we all know the arguments that he makes that, look, why should America stump up so much for defence spending if European countries in particular, or NATO countries, aren't pulling their weight?
Well, so I think that is one of his key lines. You know, he has said in the past that he thinks that there are too many in Europe that get a free ride. Now, in fairness, that was never criticism that was aimed at the UK. But I think it is incumbent on the UK as one of the key allies within NATO to really kind of lead from the front and say, follow me, we're doing 2.5%. There's another point, Sophie, which is less geopolitical. It's just the reality of the state that our armed forces are in. I came onto your show back in March when the announcement was made. And you rightly said, you know, this is, A, the money is coming pretty slowly, and B, it's not going to grow the armed forces. And all of that was true. It's still true now. But what 2.5% does is gets our current armed forces in their current size back to the kind of match fitness that they need for war fighting, rather than the more discretionary counterinsurgency missions they've been doing in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere over the last 2 decades. If that money doesn't come urgently now, then the forces that we've got at their current size won't be capable of full-scale war fighting. So there's a choice at that point. You either accept that they remain hollowed out for longer, or you have to reduce the size of the armed forces and make the forces that you've got then credible. Neither of those be palatable. So if I was in the Prime Minister's shoes, I would, yes, do the review. It's necessary to consider defence, foreign security policy every 5 years. And as an incoming government, of course, they would want to do that. But if you know that your landing point is a commitment to 2.5%, that's what the Prime Minister has said on the plane to Washington, make that commitment now, say that's happening, and then do the review to work out how you would spend the money rather than the review to get to where you've already said you're going.
Can I ask you about the very first part of your answer? Because I was quite intrigued when you were saying, look, it's great to see, a UK Prime Minister welcomed on the world stage, even if he's a Labour Prime Minister. In the election campaign, Rishi Sunak said Keir Starmer won't keep our country safe because he won't invest in our security. Was that really a responsible thing to say?
Well, I think in election campaigns, all sorts of things are said.
Or even irresponsible ones?
Yeah, because I think people are campaigning and they're trying to draw a distinction between the different politics and different approaches.
Keir Starmer won't keep our country safe.
But there is a thing, and in fairness, there are plenty of choice things that Keir and Labour politicians have said about the Prime Minister. What matters is that when you come through the other side of an election, the thing I hate more than anything, and I wonder if your other guests would agree, is when people pop up on social media and say silly things like, this government, not in my name. Well, what a nonsense. We've had a democratic exercise last week in which a government has been returned, resoundingly. I now want to see our Prime Minister succeed on our nation's behalf on the world stage. Of course I have concerns that some of his shadow cabinet, very recently voted against Trident's renewal, but I now want them to succeed and keep our country safe and do well for us all.
Let's talk a bit about the election because, look, you got an absolute hammering.
Yeah.
Your old seat, I know that there have been boundary changes, but it got totally swept away with the Lib Dem kind of yellow wave, if you like. Building the party going forward, what do you think needs to happen?
Well, not quite so much of the open warfare that's going on Twitter between two of the leading protagonists in the leadership campaign today.
If you're wondering what that is, I'll fill you in. Henry Badenoch's comments at Cabinet were leaked.
Shadow Cabinet. Now
Shadow
you're doing
Cabinet,
it.
I'm doing it as well now. And she criticised Suella Braverman, and then Suella Braverman then tweeted to say, I'd be interested in knowing whether Kemi thinks I'm having a very public nervous breakdown. Is your party having a public nervous breakdown?
Well, I think your viewers could be forgiven for saying so. And therein is the problem, right? What happened last week is miserable. Hundreds of colleagues have lost their jobs. Stand fast that plenty out there would say, my party had it coming. Collectively, we did. But there were lots of individual stories of people losing their job or their staff losing their job. It's a horrible time. Emotions are high. But we won't be electable again as a party until we recover the discipline and the ambition to be in government again. Took Labour all the way through the Miliband years and through the Corbyn years. It took us all the way through the parliaments of 97 to 2001 and 2001 to 2005 to finally move to where the public were and then recover the ambition and the discipline that the public need to see to go into government. It's hard to criticise people who are still in shock, still highly emotional. But just to be clear, no one is going to start thinking better of the Conservative Party if we play out the leadership election in quite the way it's being played out on Twitter today.
Is there any names in particular that you'd like to hear a pitch from?
So, look, my natural inclination is to head towards people like Tom Tugendhat and Victoria Atkins. I think, however, that people like James Cleverly and Rob Jenrick might actually emerge as the kind of bridge candidates who can bring people together. I just Reform are where they are. Reform may stake out a piece of political turf that is irreversibly theirs. The Lib Dems have theirs. There is an absolute gulf between the right-hand end of the Lib Dems and the left-hand end of Reform, and that is exactly where the Conservative Party needs to be. It's also pretty much exactly where the British public are and where lots of Western publics are, just to the right of centre. If we go off and have an ideological wrestle with Farage, it would be an enormous mistake and would keep us out of power for 10, 15 years.
OK, thank you very much. Good to talk to you and have your analysis today. Thank you very much. James Heapy there. I'm sure the newspapers will be covering the summit in NATO that we've been talking about today, and also, of course, the story in Bushy as well. We will have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor, Claire Ellicott. We'll be talking about that NATO summit, and I'm hoping we should be able to hear now from our political editor, Beth Rigby, who is in Washington for us. Beth, if you can hear us, what's been happening?
Hi, I don't know if you can see me. We're having some connectivity issues here in Washington, but it has been a packed schedule for Keir Starmer. There are both diplomatic and substantive elements to all of this. On the diplomacy, he will shortly be having a bilateral with President Biden. He met with President Zelensky earlier today, where he reiterated to the President of Ukraine that there had been a change of government but no change in position, reiterating that that £3 billion package of aid that Rishi Sunak promised that he... In terms of NATO allies, this all going very well.
Beth Rigby, they're our political editor. As you can see, a couple of technical issues with that live from Washington, but we'll try and get back to her later in the programme. Let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former Labour Cabinet Minister, Ben Bradshaw, and Baroness Kate Veal, who was Deputy Chief of Staff for David Cameron. Great to have you both on the programme. Just to kind of reflect on NATO, because it does feel, doesn't it, that the world is an increasingly kind of fragile, sort of dangerous place. How important is it for NATO to come together and get things right?
Very important. And at such a moment when you have war in Ukraine, you have Sweden and Finland joining, which of course is very important. But the most important looming issue is this possibility of a Trump second term. And that's why I think, you know, our new Prime Minister going there today, he looks strong and confident. I think the issue of defence spending is something on our mind, not least because of just encouraging other people and showing Trump, were he to win the election, that NATO is ready to step up. So many important relationships there and a really important first meeting, a first summit for the new Prime Minister.
I'd completely agree with that. And you know, I was pleased that we committed before the government did actually to go to 2.5. And it's often forgotten that actually after America, we're the biggest of the major NATO countries in terms of defence spending. There are still quite a few significant NATO countries that I think are under 2%. So we've got some way to go. And yeah, it was great. It was great seeing Keir on the world stage. I thought he did the country proud, and I still can't quite believe the election was less than a week ago.
You have to pinch yourself when you see him at NATO as the Prime Minister.
Yeah, no, it does feel. It feels quite strange, but good.
Labour haven't quite matched the Conservative spending, so they haven't put a time frame on it, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I thought it was interesting that something else that came out, I don't know whether it was a shadow cabinet today or some other document, was Jeremy Hunt, the former Chancellor, now Shadow Chancellor, quite clearly saying that their commitment had not been funded and they didn't know where they're going to get the money from. And it was alongside quite a lot of Conservative promises in the election campaign that weren't funded, and it was a point we made, and I think we made very convincingly. Until the Conservatives explained how they were going to fund that. I mean, I hope we do it quickly, but like everything else that we do, it's going to depend on growth, and I think that's absolutely the right position to take, because if you start saying, oh, we'll make an exception for this, everyone's going to come back and say, what about the two-child limit? What about the NHS? But let's get there as quickly as we can. Let's get the economy moving so that we can do that.
There's lots of speculation about President Biden, whether he's going to pull out or not. What's your position on that?
I mean, looking at the situation in America, it looks like the worst possible timing for the Democrats. They're coming into the Republican convention, then their own convention. They've kept Biden, who's been a very good president, and we respect him in that role, but he does look quite fragile. The problem they have is they're trying to entrench him. He's losing support, and it just looks like Trump is sitting back, thinking, this is fine, I don't need to do anything at all, no criticism of him. So I think it really is a disastrous situation for Biden.
Do you think he should pull out?
Well, I don't think it's really for us to say. I mean, I think there are people, senior Democrats in the United States, who are going to be grappling with this dilemma, and there's clearly a lot of turmoil going on in the Democrat Party. What I want is a candidate who can beat Trump, because I think, like most other people in this country and probably the rest of Europe, the prospect of a Trump presidency really worries me. So let the Democrats sort it out in their own way, but they're going to have to do so quite quickly for it to be effective.
OK, thank you very much. Indeed, we'll have plenty more from Ben and Kate as the programme continues. But we can go back to Washington, because also there for us is our US correspondent, Mark Stone. Mark, lots to talk about. First of all, the NATO summit. Anything that's caught your attention?
Well, I mean, just picking up, Sophie, on what you were saying with your guest just there about Trump, I mean, he really is the elephant in the room. No one wants directly to talk about the spectre of a second Trump presidency. But clearly, everyone here is looking over Biden's shoulder and wondering what Trump might look like. And I've been struck a lot over the course of the past few months that there are two schools of thought among diplomats here in Washington about what Trump means for NATO, what he means for the West. There is the existential school of thought that it is a complete disaster. And then there are those who say that, look, Trump's not going to want to burn the house down, that domestically for America, yes, it will be very challenging indeed. It will splinter the country. But beyond that, really, there's a lot of bluff and bluster. What's the truth? Well, honestly, people don't know. If you look at his view on NATO, well, it's oscillated a lot. Yes, on those campaign speeches, he's talked about pulling out of NATO. What's the point of NATO? He said it as recently as yesterday at his golf club down in Doral in Miami. But then when you drill down, when you talk to those behind the scenes, they will have a slightly more nuanced view, people within Trump's circle, more nuanced view about what Trump means for NATO. And indeed, diplomats here have told me over the course of the past 2 days that it's beyond doubt that Trump helped to increase spending in NATO. His threats in his last presidency put a huge amount of pressure on NATO countries to spend more, and so they did. Now, that is partly down to Trump. It's also down to Putin, because Putin's invasion of Ukraine prompted European countries to do more. But I think what we are seeing here at the NATO summit is almost by stealth, Trump-proofing Ukraine, Trump-proofing NATO, making sure that if Trump wins the presidency, then NATO and Ukraine are, at least in the short and medium term, secure and able to continue the fight against Ukraine's fight against Russia, even if Trump does something dramatic. Remember too, Sophie, that Trump alone cannot pull America out of NATO. He needs an act of Congress. The prevailing view here is that Congress at the moment would not allow that to happen. But there's no doubt that the big elephant in this room is Donald Trump, and trying to read the tea leaves, work out what that means for NATO, for Ukraine, for Western democracy.
And Mark, there's also pressure growing on President Biden tonight as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and of course they're linked. I mean, the more pressure there is on President Biden, the more chaos there is in the Democratic Party, the more chances, some might argue, Donald Trump has to win the presidency. I mean, you can argue whether or not if Biden stays in the race, then and potentially has another disastrous trip up down the line, but remains the candidate, is he going to lose the election? If he pulls out of the race, perhaps another candidate takes his place. Does that increase the pressure on Trump, because another candidate might be able to beat Trump more easily? These are the sorts of calculations that people are trying to work out. If you were to ask me the night after the debate 2 weeks ago, I would have told you I didn't think Biden was going to last the week. Well, he has. He's ridden it out. And he did that interview on ABC News week last Friday, which was neither great nor terrible. And I think that bought him a bit more time. But in the last few minutes, it's been confirmed that Senate Democrats are going to have a special meeting tomorrow, at lunchtime tomorrow, to hear from top Biden advisors about what's really going on in the White House, what Biden is really thinking. I think from that we can read that the Biden campaign is desperately trying to put the genie back in the bottle. Whether they can or not, who knows? And look, Sophie, the words from George Clooney today are absolutely staggering. An op-ed in the New York Times written by George Clooney. You might say, well, he's only an actor. What does he matter? Well, he is a close friend of Joe Biden. He is a mega donor to the Biden campaign. And the words are they're truly devastating. I'll read you a bit of it to you. It says, "I love Joe Biden as a senator, as a president, as a vice president, as a president. I consider him a friend and I believe in him. I believe in his character, I believe in his morals. The last 4 years, he's won many battles that he's faced, but the one battle he cannot face is the fight against time." And George Clooney goes on to say, "We are not going to win in November with this president. On top of that, we won't win the House and we are going to lose the Senate." I mean, just precisely what Joe Biden does not need in this week of all weeks, when he's supposed to be hosting this NATO summit, where he's supposed to be presenting himself as powerful, politically stable, personally stable, mentally. A really, really challenging time for President Biden. On the face of it, he is fighting on. He wrote a letter earlier on in the week to lawmakers on his own side on Capitol Hill, 2 pages where he was utterly defiant. But against that, really growing pressure now on him and on his stability to be able to run for office, to be able to beat Donald Trump.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone reporting there in Washington for us at that NATO summit. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, well, as the Conservatives begin what could be a lengthy race to lead the party in opposition, we'll take you through some of the runners and riders.
Three, 2, 1.
We've got an election, haven't we?
We'll start with the rehearsals.
Let's do that again, one more time.
You've got to be the best, but that is quite a lot of pressure.
It's just keeping up with everything. You don't know what's going to happen day to day.
And being forcibly removed.
You've got to beat your journalistic competition. Every day matters.
That was a very tense interview, and I'm still slightly shaking.
You train hard and you fight easy, and I think that's what we're doing.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, I want to get the latest now on our top story this evening. The police manhunt after 3 women were killed in Hertfordshire, which has now come to an end. We can go now to Bushy and our correspondent, Daniel Henry. Daniel.
That's right, Sophie. The manhunt at this point has pretty much come to a conclusion. The police managed to track down their suspect called Kyle Clifford. He was found at a place over in Enfield, and this is, about 24 hours after an absolutely horrendous scene that police would have found yesterday. 3 women from the same family found, firstly with serious injuries, who later were found to go on to die. Property just behind me, the cordon is just over there. People have been bringing flowers pretty much all day. I've counted at least 20 bouquets left for the family, and all of this following the deaths of 3 women from the same family, and they're all related to a prominent racing commentator called John Hunt. And he is someone who commentates on Sky Sports Racing and on the BBC. So there have been lots of condolences being shared on social media towards John and his family, and the police for most of the day were urging the public for any information that would have helped them get closer to Kyle Clifford, and they haven't managed to track him down. This incident where these people were found dead following the result of what police have described as a crossbow attack, that being the weapon that was used to deadly effect last night. And the police did manage to track this person down, but it's just been such an awful scene here. I've witnessed people crying in the streets, hugging each other, trying to find the words, trying to console each other. But when 3 people have lost their lives like this, I mean, what can you really do? And we're now 24 hours on with the police having found their main suspect. They haven't haven't arrested this person yet, because when they found him, he was in a state of injury. So he's been taken to hospital, and I'm sure inevitably at some point the police will start to question this person and try to understand, try to piece together exactly what happened and his relationship to the deaths of these 3 women from the same family.
Daniel, thank you very much for the update, Daniel. There on that tragic story, heartbreaking, a mum and her 2 daughters killed in that house in Bushey. Well, here in Westminster, the Conservative Party is really now focusing on its future and who might succeed Rishi Sunak as party leader. Now, he said he's stepping down. No one's officially put their head above the parapet, but everyone is talking about the runners and riders. So let's take a look now at who is said to be weighing up a leadership bid, starting with Kemi Badenoch, the former business secretary, one of the bookies' favourites to lead the Conservative Party. She, of course, had that moment in, I was about to say cabinet, but it's a shadow cabinet now, of course, isn't it? Where she laid into the Conservative Party and some of the issues that they'd had at the election. So she's one of the favourites. Someone else that we know is certainly trying to weigh up a leadership bid is this woman, Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary. I mean, really, she's been leading a leadership bid for years now, almost. Certainly on the right of the party, someone who says that they need to try and embrace Nigel Farage. Tom Tugendhat couldn't be more different to Suella Braverman. He is one of the One Nationers, so in other words, some of the people who is one of the more centre-ground cabinet ministers. Former security minister. He had a birthday drinks party on Tuesday, I should say. Absolutely classic if you're weighing up a leadership bid and trying to get some people on side. James Cleverly next. Now, he, of course, is the shadow Home Secretary. Again, a potential unifier in the party, former Foreign Secretary as well, I should say, too. He's been doing quite a lot of outreach at the minute. He's written opinion pieces. He says the party needs a sensible post-mortem. Could he come through the middle? Robert Jenrick, another one like Suella Braverman, who it feels has been launching his leadership bid before the election was even called. The former immigration minister tipped as a contender, recently a guest at Liz Truss's Popcon group. He said a few days ago that it would be self-indulgent for him to launch a leadership bid right now, although I have to say I have my suspicions on exactly what he's doing behind the scenes. Priti Patel MP, she's been employing more of a submarine strategy, although she is said to be eyeing a leadership bid herself. Former Home Secretary, could she enter the race? And finally, Victoria Atkins, the former Health Secretary, now shadowing that brief. She's refusing to say if she'd run or not. And I have to say, in the current climate, if they're refusing to rule it in or out, I think it's a good bet that they're going to run. Again, someone from the centre ground of the party. So here we go, the runners and riders. Well, let's find out a little bit more about those runners and riders with our political correspondent, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, what have you been up to this evening?
Yeah, very good evening, Sophie. Forget about the runners and riders, I'd say, for a second. The Conservative Party can't even decide on the process to find out who the runners and riders are. I was at the 1922 committee that met for the first time in full post-election this evening. It was in a much smaller room than we've expected in the past, with a much more diminished Conservative Party. In fact, they'd actually booked a room here in Parliament that only holds 120 people, which, given the fact they've got 121 MPs, was rather a perfect solution. Rishi Sunak, the former Prime Minister, but still the leader of the Conservative Party, did turn up at that meeting. He did get bangs on the tables as he entered. It was all a bit lacklustre, though, and I'm told that the mood inside was sorrowful and apologetic, and that in the end there was criticism, I think, of the election campaign, but not of Rishi Sunak himself. He was there for about 40 minutes or so before they all piled up, but the big point of this is they still have not agreed on what the process should be about how the leader should be elected and when. All we do know, and I spoke to Bob Blackman, he's the new chair of the 1922 committee, afterwards he told me that his expectation is that this is not going to get rushed through before the summer recess, so it's not going to happen in July, Sophie. That means it's much likely to be pushed back to the autumn. We could be looking at a long campaign like we saw in 2005. But also, interestingly, Bob Blackman told me his expectation is that Rishi Sunak will not be the party leader at conference, which is at the end of September, start of October. And that means I think we may well be looking at an interim Conservative leader. Who that is, again, anyone's guess. It'll be surprising the Conservative Party can agree even on that, because they are tearing strips of each other, even though this campaign hasn't begun, Sophie. Not least of all, Kevin Badenoch was reported in the Times today, have said lots of things during a shadow cabinet meeting that were very critical of the campaign and quite, I'd say, reflected quite well on her, if you like. And she put out a tweet today insisting that those conversations from the shadow cabinet had not leaked from her. This is what she said in a tweet. She said, "It's a shame our discussions in the shadow cabinet were leaked yesterday. If there is no private space to discuss our party's challenges, we will never fully address what the electorate told us last week. The views of those outside these meetings matter too, not just backbench MPs, but our party activists, members and friends who lost seats after giving everything to the campaign. In government, we had too much nodding along in the room and arguments outside it. The culture needs to change. We need to be honest with one another in private and united in the direction we take afterwards." And within an hour of that tweet being sent out, Suella Braverman, who also might be a leadership contestant, said that she'd be interested to know whether Kemi thinks she's having a very public nervous breakdown, which apparently Kemi had suggested of Suella Braverman in the past. So, as you can see, it's a pretty disunited Conservative Party. Nothing really changes, does it? But hopefully we'll get a better sense of how this process might evolve over the summer in the next week or so, certainly before Parliament breaks up at the end of this month.
Darren, I feel like your eyebrows could not be of any further raised than during that live there. Thank you very much indeed. Darren McCaffrey reporting there on the Conservative Party leadership race. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, we will hear what our panel think about the potential candidates on offer to lead the Conservative Party. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? Ben Bradshaw and Baroness Kate F. Great to have you both with us. Well, we've just been talking about the race to win the Conservative leadership. It really feels like we're just in the foothills of it at the minute, doesn't it? Ben, is there anyone that you particularly fear from a Labour perspective?
Not really, not from those who are there. And that's exactly the question I'd be asking myself if I was a Conservative. Which is the one that Labour fears most? Possibly marginally James Cleverly from those. I mean, I think Badenoch and Bradford are as bad as each other, and they both take the party to the right. They're barking right on cultural issues. I mean, they're very intent on prosecuting the culture wars, which was a disaster for the Conservatives in this election. And the other three are sort of grey men. So I think if he decides to go, and I know that his wife's had serious health problems, I think he would be the one that initially would be most worried about. But there's not much between them, to be honest.
How about you, Kate? Is there anyone in particular that you've got your eye on, that you're like, oh, I'd like it if they entered the race?
So I do think James Cleverly is looking quite strong. You know, I like Tom Tugendhat on foreign affairs especially. I think the question is he sort of broad enough? I do worry more not only about the who but about the what. You know, what are they standing for? What is their vision for the party going forward? You've got reform there in the House of Commons. You know, you've got all these 500 or more MPs more on the moderate or the centre ground. So the question of where the party's heading, I think, is so important. And then, of course, there's the timetable. We've been talking a bit about that. You know, do you use party conference as a beauty contest to hear the candidates, to hear what they have to say, or do you have someone anointed there? So all these questions, plus how do they get the leader? Do they still go to the constituencies in the way that they've done? And we've seen Liz Truss become leader when she didn't have the support of the MPs. So lots of issues there. And of course, it's not on centre stage anymore. This is going, you know, in the background with Keir Starmer out there in Washington being the statesman.
What do you think Labour is hoping for when it comes to the length of the contest? I'm thinking particularly in 2010, I guess, you know, the Conservatives were given space then to define that it was all Labour's fault, the financial crash, and that they were clearing up Labour's mess. Is there a risk of the same thing happening now for the Conservative Party?
Possibly, but I honestly don't think that the Conservative leadership is going to be top of our concern at the moment. And I think there are advantages and disadvantages from going quickly and going long. I think, if you don't mind me saying so, I think the Conservative Party needs to have a lot of deep self-reflection. And the arguments are already raging as to why they lost, and you're hearing very different arguments made from the different wings of the party, and they need to get that. They need to work that out first, and depending on where that lands. I don't think it makes very much difference whether it's long or short. But what's important for the country is that we have a functioning opposition. I think that's healthy in a democracy, and that's why for the national interest, I think a sensible centre-right opposition is better for the country than a mad far-right one.
How are you feeling at the minute? I'm intrigued because, you know, you're right there, you know, in 2010 when we had the other transfer of power from the Labour government to a Conservative government being formed. And now, 14 years later, we're in such a different landscape.
Absolutely. I mean, we have these tides in politics, and it is a good thing. We live in a democracy. We don't want a one-party system. And I agree with Ben saying, you know, the party's got to reflect not just about who, but, you know, what do they stand for? What are they trying to say? I think, you know, people are focused on the fact that there's that 34% vote for Keir Starmer. And people think, oh, you know, will it only be one term? I mean, my experience of this before was that it takes a bit of time for a party to rebuild, to think about what it stands for. And that does often take more than one election, but we will see about that.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Keir Starmer makes his debut on the world stage, but could he top some of the great diplomatic encounters of the past? Stay with us.
Well, over the longer term, 80% of our butterflies are in decline, which obviously means when we have poor springs and, as we're seeing now, a poor summer start, this can exacerbate, this can lead them to be less resilient to these changes in our climate and our weather. So at the moment, we're going through what is known as the June gap, but this is prolonged due to the dull spring and the dull summer weather that we've had so far. As I said, if there were more of them, they'd be a lot more resilient. They can cope with the vagaries of the British weather. However, this year it's a little bit more difficult for them because it's been so wet and so cold. They're they're cold-blooded insects, so they need the warmth from the sunshine to stimulate their muscles, to get them mobile and get them out there feeding and breeding, which is what they should be doing. But when the weather's dull like it is at the moment, they're too busy roosting. It's roosting. They're taking shelter as we do when the weather's poor. So they're taking shelter and they're not feeding and breeding, which will have knock-on effects for the next generation. Well, you wouldn't believe it at the moment, but this is the peak butterfly season. Most species are on the wing at the moment. So species like the peacock, the red admiral, the garden's favourite, the small tortoiseshell. Some of the blues should be around as well. The holly blue, oh, crikey, what's its name? The holly blue and the common blue, they should all be around, zipping around our gardens at the moment, but it's a little bit of a slow start for them. Well, there's lots we can do to improve it. So we can improve our gardens and our allotments and our balcony spaces by establishing what's known as a wild space. It's a campaign that Butterfly Conservation are running. So this involves growing larval food plants, so caterpillar food plants, and providing nectar sources in your garden. They are very, very sensitive indicators of environmental change. So as our climate changes and as our climate warms, the butterflies are moving around as a result of this, and they are known as what's known as indicator species. So they can be indicative of the health of our wider environment.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has made his entrance onto the world stage, attending the NATO summit in Washington, a chance perhaps to make a good impression with his global counterparts. Now, a lot of these events are about very well choreographed diplomatic encounters, but sometimes they do reveal something telling about the global pecking order.
Hello, I saw you, I know you, I knew you. I think I can remember your name. Hello, I'm sorry I lost myself. I think I thought you were someone else. Should we talk about the weather? Should we talk about the government? Hello, how are you? I know you, I knew you. I think I can remember your name.
We're not blaming the Lebanese government.
Hello, I'm sorry I lost myself. I think I thought you were someone else.
Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we, for the final time. That is Ben and Kate. So I don't know if it's bringing back any kind of flashbacks of international summits and how important a handshake is.
Definitely. The first summit I went to was the G8, as it was still then, with Russia in it, just weeks after David Cameron became Prime Minister. And it was very, very exciting, but also very nerve-wracking. And the key first moment is the family photo, of course. And you realise that it's all about who's standing the nearest to President of the United States. And they are jostling for that position.
And I think I saw a picture earlier of Keir standing, if not next to, then very close to President Biden in the front row. But, the optics matter, and the most important thing is you don't make some kind of terrible faux pas. But I think what's interesting is that I hope that what's come through in the private chats is that Keir is actually a much more charming person in private than he comes across in public. And, of course, he's new, and there's a hope that we have a stable government here, which is, you can't say that about a lot of NATO countries. So I think people would have been interested in talking to him.
Personal relationships really matter. actor, of course also proud to represent your country, but the actual relationships that you build, bilateral ones, stay with you for a long time. Very important.
How important is small talk then? Must be pretty important getting that.
Well, not all of them do good small talk. I think that is something that also can be a challenge. Some are easier.
Personal chemistry is greatly underrated in terms of importance in international diplomacy. It can make a huge difference.
I think we can probably think of a few examples of both people with great personal chemistry and ones where they have this sort of slightly awkward moment, and it gets picked up, doesn't it, on camera? You can see it. You can see it. How do you think Keir Starmer's done on the world stage?
I think he looks really strong and really good. I would have liked him to go on out there and made that defence announcement, but look, he looks fresh and new and strong, and I wish him well.
I don't need to ask you that. I know what you'll say about that.
For good so far.
Thank you both very much indeed. Great to have you both on the panel today. Well, that is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7, though. Up next, I should say, it is the UK Tonight with Matt Barbette and a special programme on the police manhunt in Hertfordshire and North London, which has come to an end this evening, and, of course, the deaths of those 3 women.